Welcome to the motherfucking relay where we're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. Well, as we discussed in my previous video, it does appear that according to the WBC's most recent update in regards to their titleists in various weight classes in the sport of women's boxing, the lightweight title, the title that Katie Taylor won from Delphine Persoon, that title appears to have gone vacant. And, you know, this is a pretty big deal because, you know, what does this mean for the future? All these different fights that Katie Taylor is supposed to have, you know, a fight with Serrano, a fight with Persoon. How does this affect those fights? Is this an issue or is this a non-issue? You know, what about Chantel Cameron? Her becoming the mandatory challenger for that belt, you know, having beaten Anisha Bashil in one-sided fashion. Where does this news leave those fights? And if you're observant, you'll know that this news, it doesn't actually affect any of those fights. It doesn't. So we'll start with Chantel Cameron's end of it. You know, why this news, it doesn't really affect that situation in the least bit, and why, you know, this news, that doesn't mean that that fight is off the table. Now, as I mentioned, Chantel Cameron became the mandatory challenger for the green belt at 135 by defeating Anisha Bashil. Anisha Bashil, who she beat in one-sided fashion. But the reason that this news is a non-issue in regards to Cameron is because Cameron has so decided to move up to 140 pounds and line herself up for the green belt up there, the green belt that Jessica McCaskill is currently holding.
And a WBA.
As I stated in a previous video, in Chantel Cameron vying for that green belt, that version of it, the 140-pound version of it.
Super lightweight.
If Chantel Cameron can get her hands on that belt, well, Katie Taylor is going to fight her for it because we know that Katie Taylor wants to become an undisputed champion in a second weight class in the 140-pound division. Thus, since Chantel Cameron is already going up there and she's already starting to line herself up for a title fight there, she's going to be fighting Anaí Esther Sanchez. The winner of that fight will be the mandatory challenger for Jessica McCaskill's green belt. One can make the inference that, you know, if Chantel beats Sanchez and then she beats McCaskill, Katie Taylor, she's going to come knocking on her door. She's going to come knocking on her door to try to take those two belts from her. So, you know, the title going vacant, Katie's title going vacant at 135, that doesn't mean that the Cameron fight is off the table. If anything, the Cameron fight is an eventuality. If all goes to plan and Cameron beats Sanchez and, you know, maybe beats McCaskill, Katie Taylor's going to have to come see her. She's going to have to. There's no way you can become the undisputed champion and not end up seeing, you know, whoever's holding those two belts, the WBC, the WBA. So this news really isn't an issue in regards to Chantel Cameron. It's a non-issue. It is a non-issue in regards to what could be the fight between Katie Taylor and Chantel Cameron. So what about the Serrano fight? How does the green belt going vacant at 135 affect that situation, affect that potential matchup? And it doesn't affect it in the least bit because Amanda Serrano wasn't even at 135. She's at 126. The fight she just had with Heather Hardy, that was at 126. And what Amanda Serrano is talking about now is potentially squaring off against Jelena Marjanovic. Sidebar, that's a great fight. That is a great fight. If they can make it, I definitely watch it. It's a fantastic matchup, okay? These are two of the most accomplished fighters in the sport of women's boxing, regardless of weight classes. Better still, how does this news of the title going vacant at 135, how does this affect Taylor versus Serrano? It doesn't.
Nope.
It's not like Amanda was at 135.
She wasn't.
And as far as the prescribed weight for the matchup, you know, they could stage this thing at 140 just as easily as they could have staged it at 135 because, lest we forget, Amanda Serrano has fought at 140 pounds. The WBO title that she won there before entering that deal with DAZN, you know, she won the WBO title at 140 in contention against Yamila Reynoso. So if you're good to fight Yamila Reynoso at 140, why wouldn't you be good to fight Katie Taylor at 140?
Why not?
There's no reason that they can't simply just stage the fight there. She's been there before.
Yeah, she has.
So why would the title, why would the green belt going vacant at lightweight, why would that affect the Serrano fight? It wouldn't. What do those two things actually have to do with each other? Not a heck of a lot. Now you might be thinking to yourself, well, hold on a second. You know, Amanda, she just fought at 126. You staged the thing at 140. That's a pretty big jump. But hey, need I remind you, okay? Need I remind you? Amanda's last fight before signing that deal with DAZN that's supposed to end with a Katie Taylor fight was at 140 pounds. And Amanda Serrano and her team, they're the ones that decided to drop all the way down there to 115 for a belt that they threw in the air as soon as they won it. Okay, that was their idea. That's what they decided to do. And they decided to do that knowing full well that they have entered a 3-fight deal that's supposed to end with a Taylor fight. You sign that deal and then you decide to go to 115 and then make a pit stop at 126. This is all of her own design, of her team's design. This is what they decided to do. So if Amanda Serrano's gonna end up coming up in weight for the fight, well, that's on you. You decided to go all the way down there. You could have stayed right there at 140.
Yeah, could have did that.
You know, before she signed the deal. The fight with Yamila Reynoso, that was a 140-pound fight, okay? You could have stayed right there and waited for Katie Taylor to move up or just drop down to 135. It was Amanda Serrano and her team's decision to go all the way down there to 115 and then make a pit stop at 126. So if you have to come up in weight now for the fight, you can't blame anybody for that but Amanda Serrano herself. Y'all the ones that decided to do that shit. But as far as this news of the WBC lightweight title going vacant, I reiterate, that doesn't affect the Serrano fight in the least bit. So what about Persoon? What about Delphine Persoon? Delphine Persoon, who some people think beat Katie Taylor, got robbed. Delphine Persoon, who many people are clamoring deserves a rematch with Taylor. How does news of the title at 135 going vacant affect that situation? And I reiterate, it doesn't really affect it in the least bit. And you know, Delphine herself, she has so chosen to move down. That's right. This upcoming fight that Delphine's got with Helen Joseph, it's not at 135. It's actually at 130. And it has been announced that the winner of that fight will receive a WBA gold title. This is one of their baby belts, one of their trinkets, but it is one of their trinkets that can be used as a prelude to a title fight for a full version of the WBA title. That, in essence, would align the winner of Persoon versus Joseph for Hyun Mi Choi, the full-fledged champion at that weight. So, you know, while Katie Taylor's title going vacant, you know, it seems like an issue, but in reality it's not. And, you know, I'm just wondering why Delphine so decided to go down to 130, you know?
You staying there?
I mean, the rematch with Taylor, that can be staged at 135 or 140.
Yeah.
Easily. You know, you want to have the rematch. You want to make it. You could stage it at either of those weights.
Yeah, why not?
And you know what? You could make it for what is now the vacant WBC title. Assuming that somebody else doesn't pick it up now that it's up for grabs. If the title stays vacant in the upcoming weeks and months, they could simply align Katie Taylor and Delphine Persoon to fight for it after this Cristina Linarda 2 fight, provided Katie wins, which is another story. But better still, you know, the title going vacant at 135 doesn't actually affect the Delphine Persoon rematch. Why would it?
There's no reason it would.
You know, if anything's affecting that rematch, it might be that Delphine Persoon plans to attempt to compete in the Tokyo Olympics, the upcoming Olympic Games. She plans to represent Belgium in those games. And I'd have to say that would affect the Taylor rematch a lot more than the green belt going vacant at 135. Like, why would that affect the rematch? Now, Delphine being preoccupied, you know, preparing for the Olympics, that might actually affect the Taylor rematch, the scheduling for it, more so than Katie vacating her title. So in a nutshell, while Katie's title going vacant at lightweight is news, I mean, it is newsworthy, at the end of the day, it's a non-factor. It's a non-issue to many of the proposed matches that, you know, people are hoping to see Katie Taylor in. And as far as why the title has gone vacant, well, it might have something to do with Katie Taylor moving up in weight for her very next fight. That might have something to do with it.
Kind of self-explanatory.
I mean, I understand if some people think that this heralds a permanent move to 140 for Katie Taylor, that she's all but done in the lightweight division, and she's going to be campaigning at 140 from here on out, moving forward. I can understand if somebody thinks that, but, you know, in women's boxing, the girls move up and down in weight a bit more than the guys do. I mean, just look at Persoon. She just had a fantastic fight at 135. What's she doing in the next fight? She goes down to 130. Katie Taylor, fantastic fight at 135. She moves up to 140. Clarissa Shields, she had a very big fight at middleweight. What's she doing in her very very next fight, she goes down to 54. It's actually a little bit more common for the girls to move up and down in weight a bit than it is for the guys. You know, that's really more of an issue in men's boxing as opposed to women's boxing. And while the perils, the dangers of moving up and down in weight, while the dangers are the same, it does happen more frequently in women's boxing than in men's boxing. Thus, a move doesn't take any of these fights off the table. It doesn't take the Cameron fight off the table, the Serrano fight off the table, or the Persoon fight off the table, much less a title going vacant. A title that none of them were holding, so why would it affect their fights? It just wouldn't. In other news, Fox executive is expecting to stage 4 to 5 pay-per-views annually. 4 to 5 pay-per-views for the PBC per year. Bill Wanger, Fox Sports Executive Vice President of Programming, means to stage this number of pay-per-view cards in the final 3 years of what is their deal with Fox. You know, they made the deal in 2018, and what he's expecting to do in the last 3 years of that deal is to put on that many pay-per-view cards annually. Wanger talked about how he wants to bring what are considered pay-per-view worthy fights to free TV, but he understands that purse requirements mostly make that approach impractical in most instances, i.e., sometimes in order to pay the fighters what they want to be paid, you got to put it on pay-per-view. He's quoted as saying, "Within our deal, we have 4 to 5 pay-per-views a year," said Wanger, whose network announced a 4-year deal with the PBC in September of 2018. "We understand that every fight can't be a pay-per-view level fight. That's why we have 12 fights per year on FS1. That's why we have 10 fights per year on Fox Broadcasting, which are free. And that's more than there's ever been in boxing in a long, long time. So our goal with this PBC deal is to bring great fights back to free over-the-air television and basic cable television in a maximum number of homes. And yes, there's going to be 4 to 5 pay-per-views a year when there are special fights like Spence versus Porter and Wilder versus Ortiz. Multiple sources have informed BoxingScene.com that Spence Porter probably will have produced approximately 275,000 buys based on initial projections from the cable and satellite operators. Spence's first Fox pay-per-view appearance, a unanimous decision defeat of Mikey Garcia on March 16th, reportedly generated about 330,000 buys. Now you might notice that, that last set of numbers they just mentioned, 330,000 pay-per-view buys for Spence versus Garcia, that's about 30,000 buys less than what they reported initially, months ago in March. In March, they said it did about 360,000, whereas here they're saying it did 30,000 less than that. It did 330,000, not 360,000. You might want to remember that. But what does all this mean for me and you, the consumers, the paying public, the boxing fans? Is it supposed to be music to our ears that you want to charge us $75, $80 5 times a year for the next 3 years? Is that supposed to be a good thing?
Huh?
I mean, if that's a good thing for somebody, it ain't for the consumers.
Huh?
It ain't for me and you.
Huh?
Especially when you got outfits like The Zone that are putting on quality matchups between guys the likes of Canelo Alvarez and Sergey Kovalev and Anthony Joshua in his rematch with Andy Ruiz for a meager $10 a month. No, $75 per fight. That's not music to my ears, much less when you say you're going to do that 5 times a year for the next 3 years. I mean, you're looking at, $375 for 5 fights.
In 1 year.
And roughly $1,100
in 3 years.
over the course of 3 years. That's roughly what that number comes out to. That's not going to be music to the paying public. Paying more, the paying public having to pay more, generally speaking, well, that's not going to be music to anybody's ears. The beauty part of it, however, is that we're under no obligation to purchase all the pay-per-views that they so decide to put on. We ain't got to buy them shits. We only have to make what purchases we see fit, and that is the upside for us. That is the upside. The downside, however, if there is one, and if it affects anyone, the downside is really more related to the PBC and Fox. And rest assured, there is a downside. You can decide to put whatever the fuck you want to put on pay-per-view. You can put together whatever 2 guys you feel like putting together, and based on their purse requisites, decide that it should be a pay-per-view. You can do that.
You can.
But ultimately, if there isn't an actual fan demand, if there isn't a growing and clamoring market for a particular matchup, you're going to continue to put up these nominal pay-per-view buy numbers. That's what you're going to keep doing. You got guys out there, they don't really know how the business works. They don't understand that 330,000 buys for Garcia versus Spence, for example. Solid number for a debut. It's a solid number for 2 guys in what was their pay-per-view debut. But in the greater scheme of things, that is far from an earth-shattering number. They think about that number, they think about what the pay-per-view costs, and they tell themselves that, well, 330,000 buys multiplied by $75 per pay-per-view, well, that gives you roughly $24 million. They think about that and they say, wow, $24 million, that's a lot of money. And what they don't realize is, well, yeah, they made millions, but they invested millions. It takes money to make money. You understand? Yeah, you make $24 million. But how much money did it cost you to put the thing on in the first place, okay? That's where the break-even point comes in. You know, these investors, the guys that get behind these events and put up the money to orchestrate these events, they're not putting up that money for the sake of putting up money. They're not, putting up money for the sake of breaking even. They're not putting money in just to get that same amount of money back. They put their money in hoping they will get more in return than what they put in, that they will get back more than what they put in. That's the whole idea of turning over a profit. So when you see a number like 275,000 buys for Spence versus Porter, approximately 275,000 buys multiplied by $75 a buy, okay, well that's roughly $20 million. Nice little chunk of change, yeah, but once again, takes money to make money. So when you're done covering the cost of what it took to put on, what the fight took to put on, because there's no such thing as a free lunch. Once you're done covering the costs, your profit margins, they're nominal.
Not that big.
And that's why these really aren't earth-shattering numbers, because you're not really making that much.
Small upside.
Not given what it costs you to put the pay-per-view on in the first place and what has to be guaranteed to the fighters, whatever the total break-even point turns out to be as a result of the costs, and then, the upside, whatever the upside is, you're not looking at much of an upside.
If there even is
so
one.
you can stage 4 or 5 pay-per-views per year. You're still going to keep putting up nominal numbers that have a nominal upside, making you a nominal profit, if that. I mean, I look at these numbers, and a lot of the time I'm wondering, what was the break-even? Because it looks like they just came in over the break-even, just over. Okay, you didn't lose any money, so that's a good thing. How much did you make, however? Well, it doesn't look like you made that much. Yeah, no, 275,000 for Spence versus Porter, another 330,000 for Spence versus Mikey Garcia, 325,000 for Wilder versus Fury last year, and these are nominal numbers that are giving you a nominal upside, if that. Nothing on the level of the Canelo and Golovkin fights. Those fights that brought in 1 million pay-per-view buys apiece, respectively. You understand? The first one brought in 1 million buys, the second one brought in 1 million buys. And the underlying difference between those pay-per-views and the PBC string of pay-per-views is that there was a demand for Golovkin versus Canelo. There was a demand, and that reflects in the numbers. Whereas with those pay-per-views, yeah, some of them are decent fights, some of them are mismatches. But whatever you're bringing in, it's not bringing you much of a profit. And in order for you to hit an astronomical number like 1 million pay-per-view buys, well, that would require you to work with other people, because those kinds of fights that bring in those kinds of numbers, you don't have enough of them to go around in-house. I can only think of one fight that might qualify as a decent-sized fight that would bring in decent-sized numbers for the welterweight division. That would be Pacquiao versus Spence. But, outside of that, what do they got? And even that fight, would that fight bring in 1 million pay-per-view buys?
No.
I don't think so. So, this is more of a reality check. That, they can put on 5 pay-per-views. They can put on 4 to 5 of them. But ultimately, it falls on the consumer and whatever his or her interests are as to whether or not that will be a massive success.